40 grown men stood up at the same time, and not one of them decided to. I know that sounds like the start of a joke. It wasn't. I was on my knees in the corner of the biggest boardroom in the city with a mop in my hand, and I watched 40 directors, men who signed away small countries before lunch, rise out of their chairs in perfect sync, like somebody had pulled one string tied to 40 spines. They straightened their ties. They smiled. They said, "Yes, Ms. Vale," in a voice that had 40 mouths and one owner. She hadn't said anything. She'd just looked at them. Her name was Celine Vale, and by the time you finish this, you'll understand why the whole city moved when she blinked. But that morning, all I understood was that my knees hurt, the floor wax fumes were giving me a headache, and I had exactly 9 more offices to clean before sunrise. I'm Eli Stone, night janitor, Vale Tower, 41st floor and up. I'd been mopping that building for 3 years, and in 3 years, not one person on those floors had looked at me long enough to learn my name. That's not a sad backstory. That's a job perk. When you're invisible, you see everything. And what I saw 3 years running was that people around Celine Vale didn't behave like people. They behaved like reflections. She'd walk a hallway and the assistants would turn to face her a half second before she arrived. The way sunflowers cheat toward a sun that isn't up yet. She'd suggest an idea in a meeting, and 12 executives would remember having that idea first. All of them at once, with the exact same wording. I watched a CFO agree to gut his own department while wearing the pleasant, empty expression of a man reading a menu. I figured it was money. That's what I told myself. Money makes people do the sunflower thing. I'd never met real money, but I'd cleaned up after enough of it to know it bent the room. I was wrong. It wasn't the money. But we'll get there. The only human being in that building who treated me like a human being was Morgan, the old man on the night desk. 60-something bad knee, a thermos of coffee that could resurrect the dead. He called me Stone like a drill sergeant who'd secretly adopted me. Every night, same routine. I'd clock in, he'd slide me half a sandwich his wife made, and he'd say, "They working you like a rented mule again?" And I'd say, "The mule gets breaks." And that was our whole friendship. And it was the best part of my day. That night, Morgan wasn't laughing. "Big board day tomorrow," he said, low, like the walls had ears. In that building, the walls basically did. Vale's cleaning house. "You want to be somewhere else when it happens, Stone?" "I'm a janitor, Morgan." "Somewhere else is the men's room on 9. He didn't smile. He looked at me the way you look at a guy who's about to walk into traffic while reading his phone. "Just keep your head down tomorrow, more than usual." You say that like I've got a second setting. "Stone." He set his thermos down. That was Morgan for serious. The thermos never touched the desk. I've been on this door 11 years. I've watched men walk into that woman's office ready to sue her into the ocean and walk out an hour later thanking her and meaning it. You know how many of them remembered being angry? None, not one. They rewrite themselves in there. He tapped the counter. "So tomorrow, when it gets strange, and it will, you keep your eyes on your mop and your mouth shut. Do the invisible thing you do so good. Promise me." I promised him. I meant it too. That's the thing about promises. They assume you'll get a vote. "Why do you care so much, old man?" I asked, mostly joking. Morgan looked at me for a second too long. "Because you're the only one in this building who says thank you to the guy who holds the door," he said. "And where I come from, that's worth keeping around." I should have listened to him about all of it. The board meeting was at 10. I was on the overnight into morning shift because 2 other guys called out. So I was still there, still mopping, when the suits started rolling in. That's how I ended up in the corner of boardroom A with a bucket and a front row seat to the thing that broke my whole life open. Celine Vale walked in last. I'd seen her 100 times from a distance, always from a distance, always through glass. Up close was different. Up close, she had eyes the color of a coin that had never been spent. Silver gray, cold, and when they passed over you, there was a pressure behind them, a hand pressing on the back of your skull. Polite, but absolute. It said sit, it said agree. It said you love me, obviously, everyone does. On 40 men, it landed like gravity. They sat when the hand said sit. They laughed when the hand said, "This is funny." She ran that entire meeting without raising her voice once, because she never needed volume. She had the other thing, the thing I didn't have a name for yet. And then there was Hugo Barr. Hugo was a senior director, the kind of man who'd been born on third base and spent his whole life describing the home run he hit. Slick, loud, one of those guys whose cologne enters the room and files a noise complaint. He had a habit I'd noticed over the years. He liked an audience for his cruelty. Being awful in private didn't scratch the itch. He needed witnesses. I was, as always, furniture. I'd angled myself into the corner. Quiet, mopping a spot that was already clean, waiting for a gap to slip out. I almost made it. Then Hugo stood up to make a point about efficiency, gestured big to sell it, and his heel caught my bucket. Now, he saw the bucket. I want to be clear about that. There was a full half second where his eyes went down, clocked the yellow bucket and the guy attached to it, and made a decision. He didn't stumble into it. He drew back his foot and kicked it, a clean, deliberate punt, so that dirty gray water sheeted across the marble and stopped 1 inch from Celine Vale's very expensive shoes. The room inhaled. Hugo turned to me with a smile like a slammed door. "You!" he said, loud enough for the cheap seats. "Clean that! On your knees where you belong! Some of us have real work." He looked back at the table for the laugh, the way he always did. And here's where the morning turned, because Celine Vale looked at me too. She turned those unspent coin eyes on me, and the pressure came down, the hand on the back of the skull, the one that had folded 40 men like lawn chairs. Every soul in that room felt it arrive and knew exactly what came next. The janitor drops, the janitor grovels, the janitor mops the floor with his own tie if she wants him to, and thanks her for the privilege. That was the physics of the room. That was the law. I felt the pressure hit, and I felt it slide off me like rain off a windshield. Nothing. Not a flicker. It was the strangest sensation, actually like bracing for a punch that passes clean through you. The hand pressed on my skull, and my skull just wasn't there for it. So I did the one thing no one in that building had done to Celine Vale in her entire adult life. I ignored her. I set down my mop. I crouched, unhurried, and I started wiping up Hugo's little flood with the towel from my belt, working the water back toward the bucket because it was, in the end, my mess to clean, whether the man was a decent human or a walking cologne advertisement. And when I'd gotten the worst of it, I stood, and I looked Hugo Barr dead in his smug face, and I said the only line I had, "You dropped something." Silence. The kind that has weight. I nodded at the puddle, at his shoe, at the whole ridiculous scene. Water's cheap. Dignity, though, I clicked my tongue. That one's not coming back with a towel. Somewhere at the table, a man made a sound like a cough that changed its mind. Hugo's face did something remarkable. It went the flat, dead gray of a screen that's lost its signal, all the confidence draining out until there was just a buffering blank where a person used to be. He opened his mouth. Nothing loaded. "Do you know who I am?" he finally managed, which is the thing men like Hugo say when the answer is nobody's checked in a while. "Senior director," I said. Kicked a bucket. Missed. Blamed the bucket. I wrung the towel out over the pail, slow because if I was going to get fired, I was at least going to finish the bit. That's a full resume from where I'm standing. A younger analyst near the end of the table put a hand over his mouth. Hugo's neck went blotchy. Later, I'd learn his exact reaction was the single most dangerous thing I did all morning, because Hugo Barr was the kind of man who could forgive you for beating him but never, ever for making a room enjoy it. He filed me under enemies right then, on a floor still slick with his own spilled water. Fine. I'd been on worse lists, probably. I couldn't think of any, but the sentiment stood. But I wasn't watching Hugo anymore, because the temperature in the room had changed, and it was coming from one seat. Celine Vale had gone very, very still. Not angry still. I've seen angry. This was something else. This was a woman who has spent 30 years pressing a button that has never once failed to work, pressing it again in front of 40 witnesses, and watching the lights stay off. She looked at me the way you'd look at water suddenly flowing uphill. Not offended, unmoored. She looked at me again, harder this time, and I felt the pressure double, felt it come at me with real weight behind it. The full freight of whatever she was. It was like standing in front of a fire hose, and I was a wall. The water hit and ran down and pooled on the floor, and I was still just a tired guy holding a wet towel, blinking at a billionaire like she'd sneezed. 40 directors watched their god push against a locked door. I did the math on the situation the only way a janitor can. This was above my pay grade by roughly the entire gross domestic product of the room. So I picked up my bucket, gave the table a little nod like I was leaving a party that had run its course, and I walked toward the door. "Stop him," her voice. I'd never heard it aimed at a person before, only at a room, up close. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, and it reached into the back of your head and rearranged the furniture. And 2 security guards by the door snapped to like their strings had been yanked. I stopped. Not because of the voice slid off me too. I stopped because there were 2 large men between me and the hallway, and I cannot stress this enough, a coward with a mop. Celine Vale stood. 40 men held their breath as one organism. She came around the table, and every step of hers landed in that dead quiet room like a coin dropping on marble. And she did not stop until she was close enough that I could see there was no color in the gray of her eyes at all. Just weather. "What?" she said. And it wasn't the room voice now. Wasn't the God voice. It was almost a whisper, and under it, buried so deep I almost missed it, was something I would not have believed if you'd told me that morning. Something scared. "What are you?" And I, standing there in a wet uniform, holding a bucket of Hugo Barr's shame, having just committed what I was fairly sure was a fireable and possibly a jailable offense, gave the honest answer of a man who genuinely had no idea. The night janitor? Nobody laughed. 40 of the most powerful people in the city sat frozen, watching their unbreakable owner stare at a nobody she couldn't break. And I stood in the eye of it thinking one clear, cold, extremely stupid thought. Whatever this is, I'm not getting home in time for breakfast. Let me back up 8 hours, because to understand how weird this was, you have to understand what I'd been watching for 3 years without knowing what I was watching. I told you people around Vale acted like reflections. Here's the specific thing that used to keep me up. They didn't remember choosing. I once heard 2 VPs by the elevator, both convinced they'd fought hard against a merger, both of them agreeing with real heat about how they'd stood their ground. And I'd been in that meeting emptying the trash. They hadn't stood anything. She'd looked at them and they'd voted yes, and then walked out of the room having invented brave little memories where they resisted. The obedience came with a receipt that said it was their idea. That's the part that always made my skin crawl. Not that she made them obey, that she made them grateful. The worst one I ever saw was about a year in. Late shift, 29th floor, I was buffing the hallway outside legal when a woman came out of Vale's office. A lawyer, young, sharp, I'd seen her around. The type who argued with elevators just to stay in practice. She'd gone in that afternoon to quit. Everybody knew it. She'd told half the floor she had a better offer. More money, saner hours, a boss who wasn't a black hole in a blazer. She came out smiling. She came out having signed a 2-year extension at the same pay. And she stopped in the hallway, right next to me and my buffer. And she got this look on her face, puzzled, like a word she couldn't quite spell. "I don't know why I was ever going to leave," she said. "To no one, to me, to the floor wax. This is the best place I've ever worked." And she believed it. You could hear her believing it. Then she frowned, just for a second, at some faint bruise in her own head where the other memory used to be. And then the frown smoothed out, and she walked to the elevator humming. I stood there with my buffer running and my stomach somewhere around my shoes. Because I'd seen the version of her that walked in. And I'd seen the version that walked out, and they were the same body wearing 2 different lives, and only one of them had chosen. I went home that night and did something I hadn't done in years. I thought about my father. My dad, Nathan Stone, disappeared when I was 10. Not died, disappeared, which is worse, because dying at least fills out the paperwork. One day he was there teaching me to fix a carburetor and telling me his weird bedtime rules. And the next there was a police report and a mother who cried in the shower where she thought I couldn't hear. He used to say the strangest things to me. I'd forgotten most. But one stuck, and standing in my apartment that night, it climbed back up, out of wherever I'd buried it. "Eli," he'd say, always the same, always looking me right in the eye. If a person ever tells you what to feel, really tells you, and you feel your own head trying to agree, you plant your feet and you feel nothing. You're a stone. Nothing moves a stone unless a stone decides to move. 10-year-old me thought it was a dad joke about our last name. Grown-up me, standing in a cold kitchen after watching a woman get her mind edited in a hallway, thought about it a lot longer. And I filed it away again, because that's what you do with the things that don't fit, and I went to bed. It would be another year before that memory stopped being a curiosity and started being the most important thing anyone had ever told me. And it wasn't just money power, because I'd cleaned for rich people before. Rich people you can hate to their faces. They just don't care. This was different. This got inside. When Celine Vale wanted the room to love her, the room loved her from the inside out with its whole chest. The one exception was that the love never seemed to reach her. She sat at the center of it like the one dry spot under an umbrella. Dry and alone, in a building where everyone adored her and not one adoration was real. I used to feel bad for her. I'd catch myself feeling bad for the woman who owned the building I couldn't afford to sneeze in. Stupid. Filed it under none of your business, Stone. Mopped the floor. Turns out it was very much going to be my business. Because here's what I didn't know that morning, and what she'd just figured out 1 full second before I had. There is a reason her button had never failed. There is a reason 40 men stand up and don't decide to. And there is a very specific, very rare, very hunted reason it didn't work on me. I wasn't nobody. I was the one thing in the world that people like Celine Vale are taught, from childhood to fear. I just hadn't gotten the memo yet. They didn't let me leave. Of course they didn't. Celine said 3 words to the room. "Clear it, now." And 40 of the most expensive people in the city stood up and filed out like school kids at a fire drill. No questions, no glances back. Hugo Barr among them, still buffering, casting one look at me over his shoulder that promised he'd remember this. Great. Something to look forward to. The guards stayed. She stayed. And I stayed, because the guards were the size of vending machines and I'd left my courage in my other uniform. "Sit," she said. I sat. Not because of the eyes, just seemed like the room to read. She circled the table slowly, and I watched her try to put me back into a category she understood. You could see her doing it, running the same test again. Small this time, a flick of the eyes. A nudge of that pressure at the edge of my head, like a woman jiggling a key in a lock that used to open. Nothing, again, nothing. Her jaw tightened by a degree. Every person who has ever sat in that chair, she said, has done what I wanted before I finished wanting it. Do you understand how long it has been since someone told me no? Long time, I offered. Never, she said it flat. Not once. Not my board, not my rivals, not my… She stopped. Something crossed her face and got locked back down. Not anyone. I want to tell you, I said something brave. What I actually said was, am I fired? She looked at me like I'd asked whether the sun was going to bill her for the daylight. And then, I swear this happened, the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. The distant relative of a smile. The first genuine expression I think I'd ever seen on her, and it was aimed at the sheer audacity of a man worried about his $11 an hour job while the ground moved under both of us. No, Mr. Stone, she said. And the fact that she knew my name, she'd read it off my chest patch, but still, no one read the patch. Landed harder than the eyes ever could have. You are not fired. Great. Then I'll just… You're the most important person who has ever worked in this building. She said it quietly, and she wasn't performing it. And that was what made it terrifying. And you have no idea why, which means someone very dangerous is going to figure it out before you do. She leaned on the table, both hands flat, and looked at me with those weather-colored eyes. And for the first time all morning, the pressure was gone from them entirely. Just a person. A frighteningly powerful, frighteningly lonely person looking at the one man in the world who could sit in her presence and stay himself. So, Celine Vale said, we're going to have a conversation. You're not going to leave. Not because I'm making you. A pause. Because I can't make you. That's rather the point. I should have been scared. I was scared. But somewhere under the fear, a small, dumb, stubborn part of me, the part my father named, was doing something that felt almost like standing up straight for the first time in 3 years of stooping over a mop. In a building where everyone bent, I just found out I didn't. That does something to a man. I can't recommend the circumstances, but I don't regret the posture. One question, I said. She tilted her head. Waited. People did not make Celine Vale wait, and you could see the novelty of it register somewhere behind those coin-gray eyes. That thing you do? I nodded at her, at all of her, at the whole quiet machine of her. To them. The floor full of guys who stand up and don't decide to. I kept my voice level, mostly. How long has it worked on absolutely everyone, but never once on you? The room went very still. I meant it as a shot at the loneliness I'd watched sit at the center of her power for 3 years. The dry spot under the umbrella, adored by a whole building and touched by none of it. I didn't expect it to land the way it did, because Celine Vale, richest and most feared person I had ever been in a room with, flinched, just barely. A hairline crack across all that glass. And for 1 second, before she buried it, I saw the truth of her sitting behind the god eyes, like a kid locked in a very expensive room. She had spent her entire life being loved by people who had no choice, which is another way of saying she had never once been loved at all. Careful, Mr. Stone, she said softly, and the softness was worse than a threat. You're the first person in 30 years who could say a thing like that to me and live. A breath. Don't waste it being clever. You're going to need every reckless word you've got before this is over. Before what's over? She straightened. Somewhere below us an elevator chimed, and both guards' heads turned toward the sound at the same instant, in the same way. Like two puppets sharing one nervous system. And I felt the cold crawl back up my spine because I finally understood I was the only thing in the room breathing on its own. Before they come for you, Celine Vale said, and they will. The moment word leaves this floor that a man walked upright in front of me. People far worse than me will want to know your name. She looked at me, and for the first time all of that terrible pressure was folded away, and there was just a woman who had recognized something she'd been taught to fear and taught separately to want. My father told me a story when I was small, about the one kind of person our sort of family is warned to destroy on sight. I thought it was a fairy tale, and now? Now there's one holding a mop in my boardroom, the ghost of that smile again, tired and dangerous and, I'd swear, the tiniest bit hopeful. Welcome to the worst-kept secret you've never heard of, Mr. Stone. Your life just got very short or very interesting. I haven't decided which. Outside the glass, the city went about its morning, $40 billion of it moving to the tune of a woman who'd just met the one note she couldn't play. And I sat there with a bucket at my feet, a puddle drying behind me, and the slow, sinking, certain feeling of a man whose invisible little life had just, very much against his will, become extremely visible. I really should have listened to Morgan. She didn't let me go home, obviously. She had someone bring me coffee instead. An assistant named Priya, who set the cup down, said, "Ms. Vale hopes you're comfortable," in a voice smooth as a hold music jingle, and then stood by the wall with her hands folded and her eyes on the middle distance, waiting to be needed, waiting like a machine on standby. "Thank you," I told her. Priya blinked. Something crossed her face, a small hitch, like a skipped frame, and for half a second she looked at me like she was surprised to be looked at. Then Celine said, "That's all, Priya," and the assistant went back on standby and walked out. I turned to Celine. "She's one of them, isn't she? One of the sunflowers." Celine had settled into the chair across from me, one leg crossed, watching me with the frank curiosity of a scientist who's found a fish that talked. "Priya has worked for me for 6 years," she said. "She is loyal, efficient, discreet, and devoted. She has told me many times that this is the best job she has ever had, and that she would follow me anywhere." A pause. I have never once heard Priya's actual opinion about anything. I have no idea if she likes coffee. I've never asked, because it wouldn't matter if I wanted her to like coffee, she would. She said it flat, no self-pity, which somehow made it land harder. "That," she said, "is what the room is. All of it. Every person in this tower, most people in this city who matter, a good number who don't. When I want a thing, the thing happens, and everyone involved is delighted to have thought of it themselves." Her coin-gray eyes came up to mine. "Do you know what it's like to have built an empire out of people, Mr. Stone? And to have never once had a single one of them in the room with you?" I opened my mouth, closed it. For once I didn't have a bit. "They're echoes," she said. "I speak, and the world says it back to me in my own voice and calls it agreement." She turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, a small human fidget, the first one I'd seen. "I could fill a stadium with people who love me. I have, actually, a product launch, 2 years ago, 40,000 cheering fans. Every single one of them adored me because I stood on that stage and let them. And I stood in the middle of 40,000 people loving me. And I have never in my life been so completely alone. Here's the thing they don't tell you about being a coward. It makes you a good listener because you're always braced for the room to turn on you, so you actually pay attention." And I was paying attention. And what I heard under the billionaire polish was a person describing a life sentence. "So when you looked at me," I said slowly, working it out loud, "and it didn't take, that wasn't just a glitch to you?" "No." She held my gaze. Just her eyes now, no pressure behind them, nothing pushing. A person looking at a person. "You are the first thing in 30 years I did not summon. You told me my floor was cheap. You called Hugo Barr a resume." The ghost smile again, and it reached her eyes this time, and it changed her whole face into something younger and dangerous in a completely different way. "You have no idea, Mr. Stone, how much I needed someone to be rude to me and mean it." "I can be a lot ruder," I offered. "For free. Comes naturally." "I'm counting on it," she said. And God help me, something in my chest did a thing it had no business doing, in a boardroom, in front of a billionaire, 1 hour after I'd nearly been arrested by furniture. New fear unlocked, I thought, and filed it under "None of your business, Stone," which was becoming the least accurate label in my entire mental filing system. She stood, walked to the window, and for a while she just looked out at the city, her city in every direction, glittering and obedient. Then she said, without turning around, "Do you want to know the worst part? I used to test it when I was younger. I'd tell someone to say something cruel to me, a real one, something that hurt. Because I thought, if I order the cruelty, then whatever's left after, the part that stings, at least that's mine, that's real, no one made me feel it. A dry little laugh with no humor in it. It doesn't work. You can't order your way to something true. The sting is just another echo. I've been chasing one honest word for 30 years, Mr. Stone. And this morning a man I pay to mop my floors handed me 2 of them by accident and didn't even know their worth." "Which 2? She turned. "You dropped something." The ghost's smile, softer now. "You have no idea. It was the nicest thing anyone said to me in a decade, and it was an insult." "I've got more insults," I said. "Backlog, honestly." "Ration them," Celine said. And for 1 second she looked almost happy, which on her was like watching a statue decide to breathe. "I want to make them last." Here is how fast a life can flip. At 6 a.m. that day, I was a night janitor whose greatest professional achievement was a spotless men's room on the 9th floor. By 6 p.m., I had a keycard that opened every door in Vale Tower, an office on the 72nd floor with a window the size of a swimming pool, and a job title that Celine invented on the spot and refused to explain. "Special advisor to the chief executive," she said, sliding the card across the desk. "Advising you on what? Grout?" "On whatever I say you advise me on, the title is a door. What matters is that you now have a reason to be at my side, that the building will accept, and a rank that makes it a crime for anyone to touch you. She said crime like it was a small word for what she actually meant. You will attend my meetings. You will stand where I can see you. And you will be paid. She named a number, and I'm not going to tell you the number, because I made a sound when I heard it, that I'm still embarrassed about considerably more than a janitor. Why do you need me in the room? She looked at me for a long moment. Because you're the only mirror in this building that shows me what I actually look like, she said. I've missed that more than I can afford to admit to a man I met this morning. I moved into the 72nd floor that afternoon, which mostly meant standing in the middle of an office bigger than my apartment holding a cardboard box with a spider plant and a spare uniform in it, feeling like a raccoon that had wandered into a bank. And that's when I got my first real taste of what the reversal was going to cost. Not from Celine, from everyone else, because the directors found out. Word travels through a corporate tower like a fart through an elevator, fast, invisible, and everyone pretends they can't tell where it came from. By the time I was unpacking my spider plant, all 40 of them knew that the janitor from the boardroom, the one who'd talked back to the boss and lived, was now sitting on 72 with a C-suite keycard, and not one of them could figure out why. That's the part that unraveled them. If Celine had promoted a rival, they'd have understood. If I'd been secretly her nephew, or a spy, or an investor, fine, the world makes sense again. But a janitor? For no visible reason? Celine Vale did not do anything for no reason. So they invented reasons, and the reasons ate them alive. Hugo Barr got there first, of course. He came up to 72 personally, which for Hugo was practically a pilgrimage. He stood in the doorway of my swimming pool office with two of his little director friends behind him, like backup singers. Enjoying the view, mop boy? He strolled in without being asked, ran a finger along my desk, checked it for dust out of pure habit. Let me save you some time. I don't know what you did, got a photo of her, got something on her, doesn't matter, it won't last. Men like you don't get to stay up here. He leaned in. I've watched 100 people try to get close to Celine Vale. You know where they all are now? Gone. Everyone. She uses them up and forgets they existed by Tuesday. A tight smile. You're a Tuesday problem, mop boy. Enjoy your Monday now. Old me, 6 a.m. me, would have looked at my shoes and said nothing and let it pass. Because that's how you survive as furniture. But something had shifted in me that morning on that wet marble when I found out I was the one thing in the building that didn't bend. I didn't have money. I didn't have power. I had exactly one thing. And it turned out to be the only thing Hugo Barr had never once in his gilded life had to earn. I couldn't be told what to feel. So I sat back in my ridiculous chair, put my feet up on my ridiculous desk and smiled at him. Hugo, I said. Kicked a bucket of dirty water at the most powerful woman in the city this morning. Missed and blamed the janitor. In front of the whole board. I let that sit. And I'm the Tuesday problem? His friends went very quiet. You've got a real gift, you know that? You keep walking into rooms and finding the one way to make everyone in them remember you're an idiot. I nodded at the door. There it is. Big one. You can't miss it well. You might. You've got a history with aiming. His face went through the whole gray screen thing again. That slow drain into a blank buffering nothing. One of his backup singers coughed. The other suddenly found the carpet fascinating. You'll regret this, Hugo managed. Probably, I agreed cheerfully. I regret a lot of things. Getting up this morning's climbing the charts. Close the door on your way out, would you? Draft in here. He left. He left, and I heard him not say anything all the way to the elevator, which for Hugo Barr was the loudest sound in the world. And I sat in my absurd chair in my absurd office, and thought, 3 years I said thank you to that man's shoes, huh? Turns out spine's like a muscle. Doesn't take long to remember it's there once you stop sitting on it. That night I did the thing that made the whole absurd promotion feel real for the first time. I took the elevator all the way down, past the marble lobby, to the basement level where the night crew clocked in, and I walked into the break room with a bag of the good sandwiches, the ones from the place on the corner that charged what I used to make in a shift. Morgan looked up from his crossword, looked at my new suit, looked at the key card clipped to my belt, the black one, the one that opened everything, and he put down his pen. Well, he said, so that's how you kept your head down. In my defense, I said, I tried. Stone, he took a sandwich. He didn't smile. You know what you walked into up there? You know what she is? Getting a clearer picture by the hour, Morgan. I sat across from him, loosened the tie I still didn't know how to knot right. You knew this whole time. You knew what she does to people. The old man was quiet for a moment. I know a man who lost 11 years to that woman's whims and got them back last week because a janitor walked past his desk, he said. And my stomach dropped, because he meant Desmond, and I hadn't told a soul but Celine. Morgan saw my face. Small building kid. Word gets down here too, just slower and truer. He leaned in. Which means you should be very, very careful who else finds out you can do what you did to Desmond. Because there's people who'd pay the earth for a man like that. And people who'd pay double to bury him. Before I could answer, the door banged open and a girl came in, 19, maybe 20. Mop in hand, uniform 2 sizes too big. The new hire I'd trained myself 3 weeks back. Mia, sharp kid, funny, worked doubles to cover her little brother's medication, and never once complained about it where anyone could hear. She stopped dead when she saw me in the suit. Eli? Hey, Mia. They said you got. She looked me up and down, and then, God love her. The first thing out of her mouth wasn't congratulations. It was, does this mean I have to do the 9th floor bathrooms alone now? Because that is a 2-person job and you know it. I laughed. First real laugh in 2 days. I'll get you help on 9. I said, and I meant it. And I made a note right there to actually do it. Because up on 72, everyone smiled at me for reasons that weren't real. And down here, a kid was giving me grief about toilets for reasons that were. And I knew which room I'd rather be in. Watch yourself up there, Eli. Mia said, suddenly serious in the way young people get when they've already seen too much. People like that. They keep you as long as you're useful, and they don't feel a thing when they're done. She frowned. No offense. None taken, I said. And I thought about Celine at the window, chasing one honest word for 30 years, and I thought, kid, you have no idea how much she'd agree with you. That's the whole tragedy. Morgan walked me to the elevator. At the doors, he gripped my shoulder, hard, the way my father used to. Your dad'd be proud you still come down here, he said gruffly. Now go be careful up there. And Stone, if it ever comes down to them, or us, he held my eye. Remember which room you'd rather be in? Doors closed on me before I could ask how he knew about my dad. I told myself I'd imagined it. I'm real good at telling myself things. Here's a scene I didn't witness, but I've pieced it together since, and you should have it because it's where the real knife got sharpened. That same night, on the 60th floor, Hugo Barr did not go home. He sat in his office in the dark and stewed, and then he did what small men always do when they've been embarrassed by someone bigger. He went looking for someone bigger still. He knocked on a door 2 floors up. The office belonged to Dorian Crest, Celine's chief financial officer, her right hand, the man who'd stood at her shoulder for 9 years and never once put a foot wrong. Everyone in the building trusted Dorian. Calm, gracious, the kind of man who remembered your kids' names. If Celine was the storm, Dorian was the harbor. I need a moment, Hugo said. It's about the janitor. And Dorian Crest, who should have laughed him out of the room instead, set down his pen, folded his hands, and said, in a voice a shade too smooth, the one she promoted. Tell me everything. Especially, and here, if Hugo had been paying attention, he'd have noticed something wrong in the man's eyes. A flatness, a distance, like a window with the lights off behind it, especially about the archivist. Desmond, I hear he had quite a morning. Hugo told him everything. He thought he was buying an ally. He was filing a report. Because Dorian Crest hadn't had a thought of his own in 6 years. And the person looking out through Dorian's eyes that night, patient, ancient, and very far away, leaned back in a chair in a very different building, in a very different part of the world, and smiled the smile of a man who has just heard that the one weapon he feared destroyed had grown itself a new edge. Nathan Stone had a son, said the thing wearing Dorian Crest to an empty office. How careless of us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't know any of that yet. That night, I just rode the elevator up to 72, ate a sandwich alone at my swimming pool desk, watered my spider plant, and had no idea that the harbor had a shark in it. The power thing happened by accident. Most of the important things do. 2 days into the new job, Celine sent me down to the archives on 45 to pull a file. A real errand, or maybe a test. I never figured out which. The archive was run by a man named Desmond Ancient Half-Blind, who'd worked there so long he'd probably been filed himself at some point. When I asked for the file, Desmond gave me the standby stare, the sunflower look, the machine-on-hold look, the same blank, pleasant nothing I'd seen on Priya. Everyone who worked close to Celine had it. She'd looked at them once, years ago, and they'd been humming her tune ever since. He shuffled off to find my file. I leaned on the counter to wait. And here's where it got strange. As Desmond passed close by me, close enough that his sleeve brushed mine, he stopped. Just stopped, dead in the middle of the room. And he shuddered, a full-body shiver like a man walking out of cold water. And when he turned around, his eyes were different. They were awake. Where? He looked around the archive like he'd never seen it. He looked at his own hands. How long have I? His voice cracked. I was going to retire 14 years ago. I told her I was retiring. I had a boat. I had my wife I was going to. He grabbed the counter. Have I been here 14 years? Son. What year is it? I told him. Desmond sat down very slowly on his little archive stool and put his face in his hands. And this old man I'd known for 6 minutes started to cry the way you cry when you find a window in a room you didn't know was a cell. I stood there with my heart going like a jackhammer, because I finally understood what my father meant. Nothing moves a stone unless a stone decides to move. But it was more than that. It wasn't just that the gaze didn't work on me. It was that being near me unworked it on other people. I was standing in the middle of the machine, and everywhere I went, the strings went slack. I got Desmond his file. I also got him a glass of water and his coat, and I called him a car, and I told him to go home to his wife and not come back. And he gripped my hand with both of his and said, thank you, son, so many times I had to leave before I did something undignified in a corporate archive. I took the stairs back up. All 27 flights. I needed them. Because here's what nobody warns you about finding out. You're the exception to the rule that runs the whole world. It's not a superpower montage. It's heavy. Every person I'd passed in that building for 3 years, every sunflower, every echo, every standby stare, was a Desmond. Was someone with a boat and a wife and 14 missing years, humming a tune that wasn't theirs, and I'd been mopping around them the whole time thinking they were just rich people weird. They weren't weird. They were prisoners. And I'd apparently been walking around with the master key in my pocket, not knowing it opened anything. I stopped on the 40th floor landing, sat on a step, and put my head in my hands. And I'll be honest with you, I thought about running. I thought about it hard. Keycard in the trash, first bus out, new town, new name, back to being furniture somewhere no one looked at anyone. Furniture doesn't get hunted. Furniture sleeps fine. But then I thought about Desmond's face when the window opened. And I thought about Mia doing doubles for her brother's medicine. One sharp look from the wrong person away from becoming a standby stare herself. And I thought about my father, who told a 10-year-old to plant his feet, and who 15 years ago got dealt with by people who bury men like me for a living. And I thought, they buried you, Dad, and you still got a word all the way down to me. Least I can do is not waste it running. Cowardice and I go way back. But it turns out even a coward has a floor he won't go below. I found mine on a stairwell that day, sitting on cold concrete. And then I got up and climbed the rest of the way to tell Celine the truth. I told Celine, I had to, you don't sit on a thing like that. And anyway, I'm a bad liar. My face narrates. I found her in her office at the top of the tower and I told her about Desmond. All of it, the shudder, the awake eyes, the 14 years, the boat. And Celine Vale, who had not, to my knowledge, been surprised by anything since roughly the invention of surprise, went pale, not gray. Pale like the blood had somewhere more important to be. Say the last part again, she said quietly. He woke up when I got close. Years of your thing just fell off him, like a jacket. I spread my hands. Celine, I didn't do anything. I was standing there. He walked past me and he came back. She sat down. She, who owned the chair, sat in it like it might not hold her. You don't just resist it, she said, half to herself, staring at nothing. Anyone can be born unable to be looked at. It's rare. It's very rare. But it happens, and they, deal with those the way you deal with a wolf near the flock. She caught herself, changed course. But that's a shield. A person who can't be controlled is a locked door. You're not a locked door, Mr. Stone. She looked up at me, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen before. And it took me a second to place it because it looked so wrong on her. It was fear. Real fear. And under it, faint, something almost like hope, which was somehow more frightening. You're a key, she said. You don't just refuse the leash. You cut everyone else's. She stood again, restless now, and started to pace the length of that enormous window with the whole city spread out below her like a circuit board. Do you understand what that means? If you can wake one archivist by brushing his sleeve, if that carries, if it spreads, if you learn to do it on purpose, she stopped, turned, and the look on her face was the look of someone doing very large math, very fast, and not liking the answer. There are people, she said carefully, who have spent a very long time making sure no one like you lives long enough to find out what you can do. And I need you to tell me something. And I need you to tell me the truth, because the truth might already be too late. She came close, closer than she had all day. Close enough that I could see the fine crack of worry between her brows. Your name is Stone. Eli Stone. Where did you get it? Your father, what was his name? Something in her voice put a cold hand on the back of my neck. Nathan, I said. Nathan Stone. He disappeared when I was 10. Why? What does that... I never got to finish the question. Because Celine Vale, richest, coldest, most untouchable person I had ever met, reached out and gripped the edge of the desk like the floor had tilted, and every scrap of color left her face, and she said one word, so quietly I almost missed it, in the voice of a woman watching a fairy tale climb out of the book and start walking toward her. Nathan. She knew the name. She knew my father's name, and whatever she knew, it had just told her exactly how much less time we had than she'd thought. Celine, my mouth had gone dry. How do you know my dad? She looked at me, and for the first time she didn't have an answer ready. And that, more than the eyes, more than the puppets, more than any of it was when I finally got scared. Because, she said, 15 years ago, the people I answer to told me they'd finally dealt with the only man alive who could undo everything we are, a breath. They never said his name. They just said it was done. Her grip tightened on the desk. And now his son is standing in my office, awake and getting stronger. Somewhere far below, an elevator was rising. The elevator that was rising did not, in fact, contain an assassin. It contained a delivery of Celine's dry cleaning. I have never been so relieved to see a garment bag in my life. My nervous system had written checks my afternoon couldn't cash. But the false alarm did something useful. It made Celine decide to stop feeding me the truth in spoonfuls. Sit down, she said. You're about to learn how the world actually works, and it's going to make you want to leave the planet. There's coffee. There's no leaving the planet. Sit, I sat. And Celine Vale told me about the iris. Here's the short version, because she told me the long one, and the long one gave me a headache that lasted a week. Somewhere back in the fog of history, some people started being born with a certain kind of eye. Silver gray like a coin that's never seen daylight. I'd noticed the color on Celine. I just thought it was contacts and good genes. It's neither, it's a mark. It means that when they look at you and want a thing, your head hands it over. Not violence, not persuasion. Just a door in the back of your skull that they have the key to and you didn't know was there. They call themselves the iris, capital I. Very proud of it. The world calls them nothing because the world has no idea they exist, which is the entire point. Because here's what you do. If you're born able to make anyone agree with you, you don't rob banks. That's small. You quietly become the banks. You become the boards, the ministries, the newsrooms, the courts. You install yourselves at the top of everything, and then you have your looked-at echoes vote you more power, love you for it, and forget they ever did anything else. For centuries, the iris don't rule the world the way a king rules with a crown and an army you can point at. They rule it the way a hand rules a puppet. You never see the hand. You just see the puppet dance and assume it's alive. How many of them are there? I asked. Not many, a few thousand worldwide. It doesn't take many when each one can move a city. She looked out at her glittering, obedient skyline. Most are minor, a look that fades in a day, works on one person at a time, a regional problem, a crooked judge, a rigged election, a family kept in line. Her jaw tightened. And then there are the strong ones, the ones who can hold a whole room for years, a whole company, a whole bloodline. Like you? Like me, she agreed, without pride, which somehow made it more chilling. I am, as far as the iris are concerned, quite powerful, top of the second tier. It's why they let me have a tower and a fortune and a city to play with. A pause. It's also why they've never fully trusted me, powerful enough to be useful, powerful enough to be watched. Second tier, I said. So who's the first? And Celine Vale, who had not shown me one moment of hesitation about anything all day, went quiet. There's a council, she said finally. 7 of them. The oldest and strongest iris alive. They don't hold companies. They hold countries. They decide which wars happen and which markets crash and which men become presidents. And they've been doing it since before your grandfather's grandfather. Because the very strongest of them stopped aging the way we age a long time ago. The look turned inward on a body over centuries. She said it flatly, daring me to disbelieve, and I found I couldn't. Because I'd watched an archivist get 14 years handed back to him that afternoon. The one who matters, the one you need to fear, is the oldest, the first among them. He's had 100 names in 100 lifetimes. These days he goes by Magnus Cain. The name meant nothing to me. I said so. It's not supposed to mean anything to you. That's how you know he's good at it. She turned from the window. Magnus Cain is the reason there's a hidden order to the world at all. He built the iris into what they are. He is the closest thing this planet has to a god who bills by the hour, and he has exactly one fear, one thing on this earth that keeps a 500-year-old man awake. She looked at me. A null, she said. Someone the look doesn't touch. And worse, someone who unmakes it in others. Because everything the iris have, everything Cain has built over 5 centuries, is puppets. Millions of them dancing on strings. And a strong enough null in the right room doesn't fight the puppeteer. Her voice dropped. He just cuts every string in the building at once, and the whole thing, the empires, the fortunes, the obedient world, wakes up, remembers, gets angry, all at the same moment. She let that land. One null in the wrong place could end the iris in an afternoon. Cain knows it. So for 500 years, the council has hunted your kind to the last child. There aren't supposed to be any left. And my father, I said. My mouth was dry again. Nathan Stone was the strongest null anyone had felt in a century, Celine said quietly. I never met him. I was young. But I heard the council talk about him the way you'd talk about a fire heading for your house. And then one day they said the fire was out. She held my eyes. They lied to me, Eli. Or he did something clever, because the fire wasn't out. He just made sure it had somewhere to go. A breath. He had a son, and he taught that son one sentence and then let himself get caught so no one would go looking for the boy. I thought about my dad looking me dead in the eye. Nothing moves a stone unless a stone decides to move. I'd thought it was a joke about our name. It was an instruction manual. It was the only inheritance he had time to leave me, and he'd hidden it in a bedtime rule so a 10-year-old could carry it past men who could read minds. Because a rule you don't understand is a rule you can't be. Looked into surrendering. I had to put my coffee down. My hands weren't steady enough for it. Okay, I said after a while. Okay, so, follow-up question. I looked at the most powerful woman I'd ever met. Sitting in a tower she ruled with a glance, telling me she answered to monsters. You're one of them. You're Iris. You've spent your whole life doing to people exactly what Cain does, just on a smaller scale. Priya, Desmond, 14 years. I wasn't angry, exactly, but I wasn't going to pretend it away either. Why are you telling me any of this? Why not just hand me over and stay in your nice tower? It was, I think, the most important question I asked her the whole time I knew her, and she didn't dodge it. When I was 6, Celine said, my father took me to a house in the country and told me it was time to learn what our family does. There was a man tied to a chair, a null grown, terrified, a schoolteacher. They'd found him because his students never seemed to catch on to any of the little compulsions the Iris kids were taught to plant. He was harmless. He'd never hurt anyone. He was just born wrong, by their measure. She said it in the flat, careful voice people use for the things that made them who they are. My father looked at the men in the room and had them do it. And then he looked at me, 6 years old, and said, this is why we're safe. Never forget the sound. She was quiet for a moment. I've spent 30 years being exactly what they raised me to be, she said. I run a city on strings. I've done things to people that should have a window in a room they don't know is a cell. You saw one of them cry in my archive today. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm good, Eli, because you've cleaned up after what I am for 3 years, and you know better. She met my eyes without flinching. But I never forgot the sound, and somewhere in the last 30 years, I stopped being able to convince myself the schoolteacher was the dangerous one in that room. A pause. For 6 years now, I've been quietly losing the council's hunts. A file that goes missing. A trail that goes cold. A null who gets a warning and a plane ticket a day before the men arrive. Small things. Deniable things. The only rebellion available to a coward with a very good poker face. The ghost of a smile. You and I have more in common than you'd think. You've been protecting nulls, I said slowly. The thing your whole world exists to destroy. Badly. Quietly. Terrified the entire time. She spread her hands, and then the strongest one in 100 years walked into my boardroom holding a mop and told me I dropped something and did not bow. Her voice went strange and low. Do you understand now why I can't let you leave? It was never about power, Eli. I have all the power. I'm drowning in power. You're the first person in my entire life who is in the room with me and not on a string. If I let you walk out that door, I go back to a tower full of echoes and one honest word I'll spend the rest of my life failing to hear again. She looked away, like she'd said too much. So, yes, there it is. That's the ugly little truth. I'm keeping you because you're a weapon that can save my life. And I'm keeping you because you're the only company I've ever had that was real. I haven't decided which one I'm more ashamed of. The room was very quiet. For what it's worth, I said, you could have just gone with weapon. The honesty's a lot. I'm a janitor. I'm not equipped. And Celine Vale laughed, an actual laugh, startled out of her, bright and completely unguarded. And it transformed her face so completely that I forgot for a second she could end my life with a look. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth like she'd embarrassed herself. See, she said when she'd recovered. That's the thing I can't get anywhere else. Do you know the last time someone made me laugh without my permission? Long time, I said, because I'd learned the rhythm by now. Never, she said softly. And there it was again, that hairline crack across all the glass, and behind it, unmistakable now, a person. Not once, not until this morning. New fear unlocked, I thought, for the 3rd time that day. And this one I couldn't file anywhere at all. The world didn't give us long to sit in it. 2 days later, Magnus Kane reached into Celine's house and knocked, just to show that he could. It happened at a shareholder dinner, one of those events where 200 rich people eat small food and pretend the numbers are a party. Celine had to go. I had to stand 3 feet behind her looking like a special advisor and not like a man who'd been unclogging drains the week before. Dorian Crest was there too. Gracious as ever, remembering everyone's kids' names, and every time he came within 10 feet of me, I felt something a wrongness, a static, like standing too close to a speaker playing a song at a frequency you can't quite hear. I didn't have a name for it yet. My body did. My body kept trying to walk me the other way. Halfway through the dinner, a man stood up. Nobody important. Mid-level VP named Ashford, 3 drinks in, the kind of guy who laughs at his own toasts. He stood, tapped his glass, and everyone turned politely. And then his face went slack, that standby stare, but wrong, colder, a stare with someone else's weather in it. And he opened his mouth, and the voice that came out was Ashford's voice saying words that were not Ashford's, in a cadence 500 years older than the room. "Celine," the thing wearing Ashford said pleasantly, "you've been careless with the cleaning staff." The whole table thought it was a bit. They laughed. Celine didn't. Celine had gone still in the exact way she'd gone still when I didn't bow. The stillness of someone whose unbreakable thing has just been broken from the outside. "Magnus," she said quietly, "you found something in your building." Ashford's mouth went on, while poor Ashford's eyes stared at nothing. A man used as a telephone. "Something we thought we'd thrown away 15 years ago. Did you think I wouldn't feel a string go slack all the way over here?" A chuckle that did not belong on that face. "An archivist woke up, Celine, in your tower. That's a very loud thing to a man who's been listening for it for 5 centuries. Dorian, I noticed, had gone very quiet and very attentive across the room, reporting, always reporting. "Send the boy to me," the thing said. "Nathan's whelp. Do it quietly, and I'll let you keep your tower and your second-tier little life. You've always been useful in your way." The pleasant voice dropped a few degrees. "Refuse, and I will remind you what happens to Iris who forget which room they were raised in. I made you, Celine. I can unmake the world around you before dessert. Think of your city. Think of every string in it running through my fingers." A pause. "You have until the summit. Bring me the null." Ashford's face snapped back to life mid-sentence. He blinked, looked at his raised glass, looked at 200 staring faces, and, bless him, decided to just finish the toast. "To a great quarter," he said gamely, and sat down, and never knew he'd been a phone. The table applauded. Celine lifted her glass with a smile so smooth you'd never guess her hand was white-knuckled underneath the table. And I stood 3 feet behind her, a janitor in a borrowed suit, having just been personally threatened by a 500-year-old god through the mouth of a drunk VP, thinking one very clear thought. Morgan told me to keep my head down. Morgan is going to be so mad, it got worse before we even left the building. Because Kane, it turned out, hadn't just called to threaten. He'd called to distract. That's the thing about being 500 years old. You don't make one move, you make 3, and you let the loud one hide the quiet ones. The quiet one was waiting in the parking garage. Celine's driver brought the car around. I was half a step behind her, still shaking off the dinner, when I saw them. 2 men by the elevator bank. Ordinary men, forgettable men. The kind you don't look at twice, which was exactly why I looked at them twice. Because 3 years of being invisible had made me an expert on people who are trying not to be seen. And behind them, held between them, gripped by the collar, bleeding from a cut over his eye, was Morgan. My Morgan. The old man from the night desk. Off shift, out of uniform, grabbed on his way home like a bag of groceries. Ms. Vale, one of the forgettable men, smiled, and his eyes were the wrong color. Pale silver gray, a minor iris, a council errand boy. Mr. Kane thought you might need a reminder that he can reach everything you care about, or everything the janitor does. He gave Morgan a little shake. Funny thing, this one's a nobody, but the boy comes down to the basement every night to eat sandwiches with him. We've been watching. We know who you love, Mr. Stone. We always do that part first. And I watched Morgan, bleeding, 60-something bad knee, lift his head and look at me. And instead of fear, his split lip pulled into something almost like a grin, and he said in a voice that came out rough but steady, "Told you to keep your head down, Stone. That's the moment. If you want to know the exact second a tired coward with a mop decided to stop running and start hunting, it's that one. Not the boardroom, not the tower, not even my father's name. It's an old man with blood on his face making a joke to make me feel better while 2 puppets held him by the collar. Something in me that had been bending for 3 years finally quietly set. Let him go, I said, and my voice didn't shake. First time all week, the errand boy laughed. Or what, sweeper? I took 1 step toward him, and I felt it happen, the thing with Desmond. But on purpose this time reaching, the way you'd reach for a light switch in a dark room you've finally memorized. The static, the slack, the strings going loose. The iris errand boy holding Morgan suddenly staggered, his pale eyes going wide, his look guttering like a candle in a draft, and his partner grabbed his arm, alarmed, and hissed a word I didn't know and I understood with a cold, clear certainty that I had never felt before in my entire furniture life. They weren't afraid of Celine. They were afraid of me. Let him go, I said again, and took another step, and felt the whole garage go quiet the way a room goes quiet when the biggest thing in it finally stands up. The errand boy's look guttered out completely. I saw it go, the pale silver drained out of his eyes like water out of a cracked glass, and for one raw second he wasn't a council weapon. He was just a man in a parking garage with his hands on a bleeding grandfather, wondering how he'd gotten there. His partner was stronger, held on longer, but I took a third step, and the static rolled off me and hit him too, and his knees buckled, and Morgan, bad knee, split lip, 60-something and absolutely done being held, chose that exact moment to drive his elbow back into the man's gut and stumble free. "Get in the car, Morgan," I said. The two Iris didn't chase. They couldn't. They were on the concrete, one on all fours, one clutching his own head, both of them staring at me the way you'd stare at a fuse burning down towards something large. The stronger one got a word out, thin, disbelieving, more to himself than to me. "Nathan's," he breathed. "You're Nathan's." "Yeah," I said. "Tell your boss the whelp says hi?" I didn't feel powerful saying it. My legs were shaking. I nearly threw up in a very expensive parking garage. But I got Morgan into the car, and I got in after him. And Celine's driver pulled us out of there while the two puppets Kane had sent knelt on the ground behind us, unlooked, awake, and afraid. And that, I would learn, was a message that traveled up to a 500-year-old man a great deal faster than any phone. The Null didn't run. The Null walked toward you and turned your own soldiers off with his hands in his pockets. Kane had wanted to scare me. He'd just found out I could scare him back. We took Morgan to Celine's private floor. She had a doctor on retainer, the way normal people have a plumber. While the doctor stitched the cut over his eye, Morgan sat there grumbling that he'd had worse, falling off a ladder. And I stood in the corner with my arms crossed too tight, running very hot for a man who'd spent 3 years running invisible. "They grabbed you to get at me," I said. "Because I eat sandwiches with you. Morgan, I'm sorry, I never should have." "Stop," he said it like a door closing. "Don't you do that? Don't you dare stand there and decide my getting jumped is a thing you did." He winced as the needle went in. "I've known what that woman is since before you could hold a mop. I chose to look out for you anyway, eyes open, because somebody had to, and everybody else on that floor is a sunflower." He fixed me with one good eye. "You want to be sorry? Be sorry later when it's over. Right now you point that spine you finally grew at the people who put blood on my face. You hear me?" I heard him. And Celine, this is the part I didn't expect. Celine did not do the billionaire thing of writing a check and moving on. She sat down across from Morgan, this woman who'd run a city on strings for 30 years, and she said, quietly, "They took you because of us. That's on me as much as him. So here's what happens now." And she laid it out. Morgan and Mia both off the night desk, relocated, new names on paper, a security detail that answered only to her, and a number attached that made Morgan choke on his own objection. Not charity, not a bribe, a debt, stated plainly and paid. "I don't want your money," Morgan started. "It isn't a gift," Celine said. "It's a wall. You'll be behind it whether you like the man who built it or not." And then lower, in a voice I'd never heard her use. Not the God voice, not even the cracked glass one. Something rustier, older, like a word she'd forgotten how to shape. "Thank you for looking out for him when no one made you. I've spent my whole life around people who couldn't choose to be kind. It appears I'd forgotten what it looks like when someone can." Morgan looked at her for a long moment. Then he grunted. "He speaks well of you," he said. "The kid, God knows why, but he does." He nodded once. "Don't make a liar out of him." "I'll try not to," said the most powerful woman in the city, to a night watchman with stitches over his eye, and meant it, and I stood in the corner watching the two most important people in my life take each other's measure and improbably approve. Later in the hall, Mia caught my arm. She'd come straight over when she heard, He's okay, he's tough, tougher than me." "That's not saying much," she said, but her voice shook when she said it. Then she looked up at me, this sharp kid who did doubles for her brother's medicine. And she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Eli, whatever you are now, whatever this is." She gestured at the floor, the tower, the whole impossible thing. "Is it going to keep the wrong people away from my brother, or is it going to bring them?" I didn't lie to her. She'd have known both, I said, for a while. "And then if I do this right, only a way." I put a hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to do it right, Mia." "You'd better," she said. "You still owe me help on 9. Here's what nobody warned you about growing a spine. The first thing it does is start noticing things your old crouched-over life let you ignore, like Dorian Crest. After the garage, I couldn't unfeel it. Every time Celine's perfect right hand came into a room, my skin did the speaker hum thing. That wrongness, that off-frequency static I'd felt at the dinner. At first, I thought it was just nerves. Then I thought it was suspicion of the man himself. But it wasn't a feeling about Dorian. It was a feeling about the thing standing behind Dorian's eyes. Because here's what I'd figured out painfully. That week, my body could feel a look. When Celine held someone on a string, I could feel the string, a faint tension in the air around them, like a held breath. Priya hummed with it. Desmond had, before I cut his. Every sunflower in that building gave off the same quiet strain. Dorian gave off a different one. Older, colder, a string that didn't lead to Celine at all. It led somewhere 500 miles and 500 years away. So I did the thing my father's whole life had trained me for without either of us knowing it. I didn't say a word. Not to Celine. Not yet, because Dorian was her right hand of 9 years, and I was a janitor of 9 days. And your most trusted man as a spy is not an accusation you make on a hunch, I gathered. I started paying attention to Dorian the way I used to pay attention to a room while pretending to mop it. I noticed he never disagreed with Celine, not once. Not ever, which sounds like loyalty until you realize her actual staff argued with her constantly, and she liked it. I noticed he took a private call at 3 a.m. building time, every night, always alone. Always to a number that pinged a server farm in a country Celine did no business in. I noticed that when I accidentally walked too close to him at a budget review, his sentence stuttered. A hitch, a skipped frame. The exact glitch I'd seen on Priya the moment my thank you slipped past her string. And for half a second, Dorian Crest looked out of his own eyes, lost and drowning, before the cold thing behind them yanked him back under and smoothed his face into that gracious harbor calm. There was a man in there, a real one, trapped 9 years deep, being worn like a coat by Magnus Kane, reporting every secret Celine had ever whispered near him, straight up the string to the council. Every plan, every hidden null she'd saved, every weakness. Me. I wanted to grab Dorian by the collar and cut the string right there. The way I'd cut Desmond's, wake the drowning man and let him name his own puppeteer in front of everyone. My hand actually itched to do it. I didn't, because I'd watched Celine run a city by never showing her whole hand. And I'd watched Kane run the world the same way. And I was starting to understand the one rule both of them lived by. You don't cut the string the enemy is holding until the enemy has both hands full and the whole room is watching. Wake Dorian too soon and Kane simply grabs a new puppet. And I've shown my only card for a spy I can't even prove was one. So I gathered and I waited, and I let Dorian Crest keep believing he was the smartest shadow in the tower. The summit was coming. Whatever Kane wanted done, he'd want it done there. You have until the summit. Ashford's borrowed mouth had said. Dorian would be part of it, and when the whole room was watching and Kane had both hands full reaching for something enormous, I was going to walk up to his favorite spy, put a hand on his shoulder like an old friend, and turn the lights back on inside Dorian Crest at the single worst possible moment for the man 500 miles away. I didn't say any of that to Celine. I told her only that Dorian felt wrong and to keep him close and tell him nothing that mattered. She looked at me for a long moment. You've gotten very good at this very fast for a janitor, she said. Turns out it's the same job, I said. You watch a room full of people who don't see you, and you clean up what they leave behind. I shrugged. I just traded up on the mess. She almost smiled. Almost, then she said, quieter. Be careful hunting Kane's shadows, Eli. He's had 5 centuries of practice being the thing in the room no one suspects. A pause. So have I. It's not a skill that leaves you clean. And somewhere across the world, in a room I've never seen, a 500-year-old man received a report from a night in a parking garage. 2 soldiers switched off like lamps. A whelp who walked toward danger instead of away, and for the first time in a very long time, Magnus Kane felt the thing he'd spent 5 centuries making sure no one could make him feel. He set the summit's date 1 week sooner, and he told his shadow in Celine's tower to make certain the null was in the room when it happened. Both of them thought they were setting the trap. You want to know how you train a man to switch off gods with his hands? Neither did I. We had 1 week and a school teacher's worth of theory, and a lot of very expensive trial and error, Celine taught me. Which was, she pointed out dryly, deeply against her own interests, I am the only person in history to voluntarily teach a null to aim. But she did it, in a locked room on the 72nd floor, night after night, because the summit was coming, and a weapon you can't aim is just a way to get yourself killed enthusiastically. Here's what we figured out. The waking wasn't magic. It was pressure, and it had range, and range was a muscle. When I was scared or angry, the garage, the archive, it flooded out of me uncontrolled, cutting every string in reach whether I meant to or not, and then it left me shaking and useless for an hour. That's no good. You can't run on a panic that flattens you afterward. So Celine made me do the opposite of what came naturally. Stay calm, and reach on purpose, like extending a hand in the dark instead of knocking the whole table over. We tested it on volunteers. Not really volunteers. Celine would put a light look on a staffer, a gentle one, prefer the blue folder, nothing cruel, and then have me stand across the room and try to lift just that one string without touching anything else. First night I woke the whole floor and 3 people on the floor below, and a security guard had an existential crisis in the stairwell. By the 4th night, I could reach across a room and snuff one specific look like pinching out one candle in a chandelier. Further, Celine said, every night, Kane will be holding a room. You need to reach a room. You know what's fun about this? I said, dripping sweat on her very nice carpet after an hour of reaching. You spent 30 years making people into puppets, and now you're coaching the guy whose whole thing is cutting puppets loose. Do you feel that? That's called irony. It's got a real texture up close. I feel it constantly, she said. It keeps me warm. She handed me water, again. But here's the part that mattered. The part that wasn't about range at all. Somewhere around night 5, reaching until my head throbbed, I stopped thinking of it as a weapon. Every string I practiced cutting was a person. That was the whole thing. Kane had puppets. I had the one power in the world that treated a puppet like a person worth waking. When I reached out in that room, I wasn't charging a gun. I was opening a lot of cell doors at once, and hoping the prisoners forgave me for how long they'd been in there. That reframing did something the range drills couldn't. It made the reaching easy. Anger flooded and burned out, but wanting to open a door that I could do all night. You've changed how it feels, Celine said, watching me hold 3 strings slack at once without breaking a sweat. She said it oddly, almost wistful. When I do it, it costs me nothing and I feel nothing. When you undo it, it costs you everything and you feel all of it. A pause. Your father must have been extraordinary. He was a mechanic, I said. He fixed carburetors and told bad jokes. He raised the strongest null in a century, hid him in plain sight from a council that reads minds, and got a single sentence past all of us that turned out to be a set of blueprints. Celine said quietly. I never met the man. I think I'd have liked him. I think he'd have hated me on sight, correctly, and I think I'd have deserved it. She looked at me, and I think he'd be very proud of the man dripping on my carpet. I had to look at the window for a minute. Something in my eye. Floor wax probably, old habit. The real test came on night 6, and it wasn't a volunteer. Turns out Celine had kept one. The stronger of the 2 errand boys from the garage, the one who'd breathed Nathan's before his knees gave out, hadn't made it out of the building that night. Her people had scooped him off the concrete after we drove away, and he'd been sitting in a very comfortable, very locked room on the 68th floor ever since, refusing to talk, radiating that cold council static that made my teeth itch. He's a real one, Celine said outside the door. Minor but trained and loyal to Kane down to the marrow. Whatever you can do to him, you can do at the summit. If you can't do it here, on one man, in a quiet room, you have no business trying it there. She looked at me. No pressure. You're so encouraging. Has anyone told you that? It's a real gift. We went in. The errand boy, his name was Cole, I learned, and knowing it made it harder, which was the point, my father's whole point, looked up and sneered. The whelp, come to switch me off, sweeper? Go ahead. Kane will feel it. He feels everything I sat down across from him. And instead of reaching for the string the way I had in the garage, all panic and flood, I did the thing Celine had drilled into me. I stayed calm. I found the tension in the air around him. The leash Kane had riveted into the back of this man's head years ago, thin and old and deep. And I didn't cut it like a wire. I opened it like a hand. Cole went rigid. His sneer slid off. And then his eyes did the Desmond thing, the awake thing, the water-flowing uphill thing, and Cole, counsel loyal, marrow-deep Cole made a sound I'll hear for a while. Because the leash Kane put in a man doesn't just take orders, it takes years. And what came back to Cole all at once was every year of them. I have a daughter, he said to the table, to his own hands, in a voice that had forgotten how to be a soldier's. I have. She'd be 9 now. He told me she was. He made me believe. He looked up at me, and there was no counsel left in him. Just a father doing the same math Desmond had done in the archive, and getting a worse answer. How long have I been his? I told him what I could. Celine, quietly, wrote down a name the daughters to go find. And I walked out of that room shaking, not from the effort, because there hadn't been much effort, but from the size of it. Because I finally understood what I was, all the way down. Kane made men into weapons and forgot they'd ever been men. I was the thing that walked in afterward and reminded them. That's not a superpower. That's a responsibility with a body count if you get it wrong. You woke a council loyalist in under a minute. Celine said in the hall, and she sounded almost frightened. Without touching him, Eli, I've never heard of a null who could do that. Your father, at his strongest, needed contact and time. She studied me. You're not as strong as Nathan Stone was. Thanks. You're stronger, she said. You've been getting stronger every day since the boardroom. Do you understand what that means for tomorrow? A pause, and under her calm, real awe and real fear. It means Kane doesn't know what he's actually built next to. He thinks he's setting a trap for a man like your father. He has no idea the son grew past the father in 3 weeks in my tower. I didn't feel proud. I felt the weight of Cole's daughter's name in Celine's pocket. Then let's not waste it, I said. 2 nights before the summit, I gave Celine the file on Dorian Crest. I'd built it the way I used to build a mental map of a dirty office. Quietly, thoroughly, without anyone noticing I was doing it. The 3 a.m. calls, time-stamped. The server farm they pinged, in a country where she had no business and Kane had 3 shell companies. Pattern of every leaked hunt, every null she'd tried to save who'd been caught anyway. Cross-referenced against the exact meetings Dorian had sat in. It lined up like a barcode. 9 years of her secrets walking out the door in her right-hand man's mouth. I watched her read it. I've seen Celine Vale threatened by a 500-year-old god through a stranger's face and not blink. I've seen her run a room of 40 men with a glance. I had never seen her look the way she looked reading that file. It wasn't fear, it was something worse and quieter. The specific, sick vertigo of a person who prides herself on seeing everything, realizing she's been performing every private moment of her adult life for an audience she trusted. 9 years, she said. Her voice was very flat. He was in the room when my mother died. He handed me a glass of water at the funeral. I told him things I've never told. She stopped, set the file down with a care that was worse than throwing it. Kane has been watching me grieve through my friend's eyes for 9 years. There's a man in there, I said. The real Dorian trapped 9 years deep. What Kane did to him is the worst thing in this whole file, and it's the one part that isn't his fault. I know. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. And then, this is the part that told me who Celine Vale actually was under all the strings. She didn't order his execution, didn't have him vanished, didn't do a single one of the ruthless things 30 years of being Iris would have made easy. She said, then we get him back, when it's safe. We cut the string, and we give the man his 9 years' worth of choices back. A breath. But not yet. Not before the summit. If Kane feels Dorian go slack early, he'll know we know, and he'll change the whole plan. That's exactly what I thought, I said. She looked up at me. We think alike now. That's either very good or a sign I've been a terrible influence. Little of both, I said. Here's the play. We keep feeding Dorian what we want Kane to hear. Every false plan, every wrong location, every panic we don't actually feel, we let his favorite spy carry it straight up the string. Kane thinks he's reading our hand. I felt the cold, clean click of a plan locking into place. The same feeling I used to get when I finally found the source of a smell 3 offices had been ignoring. And at the summit, when Kane's got both hands full and the whole world's watching, I walk up to Dorian, put a hand on his shoulder like we're old friends, and I turn the lights back on inside him at the exact worst second of Magnus Kane's 500-year life. Celine was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, you've become genuinely frightening. Do you know that? It's extremely attractive, and I resent it. Focus, I said, and my face was doing something warm and traitorous, and I pretended it wasn't. We tested the turn the next morning, and it worked so cleanly it scared me. The play was simple. Feed Dorian something false and specific, then watch to see if Kane bit. So Celine held a private strategy call in a room she knew Dorian could overhear, and in it, all reluctance and lowered voice. She let slip that she was moving me out of the tower before the summit. Somewhere safe. A property upstate. She even named a fake town. We didn't have to wait long. By afternoon, one of Celine's people flagged a chartered aircraft, quietly rerouting toward a regional airport near that fake town, and 2 consultants no one had hired booking the only hotel there. Kane had heard the janitor was moving, through his favorite ear, and he'd sent men to wait where I'd never be. There, I said, watching the flight tracker crawl toward a place I was never going. That's Dorian's string. Live every word we say near him. Kane hears by dinner. The cold click again. So from now on, everything we want Kane to believe, we say near Dorian. Everything real we say on your roof, where the only witness is the weather. Celine watched the little plane icon inch toward nowhere, and something complicated crossed her face. Grief for the friend Kane had stolen. And under it, the clean satisfaction of a hunter who's just confirmed the enemy's leash runs both ways now. 9 years he's used my own house against me, she said. Let's spend the last 2 days using his own ear against him. You'd have made a terrifying Iris, she added. That's the nicest insult you've given me all week, I said. I'm going to get a big head. Which brings us to Hugo Barr, who could not, would not, leave it alone. Small men never can. While gods maneuvered and spies reported, Hugo spent that week doing what Hugo did best, nursing a grudge into a plan. He'd gone to Dorian for help humiliating me, remember? And Dorian, or the thing wearing him, had been happy to let Hugo make noise, because a loud, angry director stumbling around was excellent cover for a quiet spy. So Kane's shadow fed Hugo just enough rope, and Hugo, delighted, built himself a gallows. His plan was almost impressive in its stupidity. He'd dug up my personnel file, janitor, 3 years, no degree, a nobody, and he'd arranged to accidentally have it projected on the big screen at the quarterly all hands, in front of the entire company, with a little presentation about vetting standards and who we let into the C-suite these days. He was going to expose me as a fraud, a mop that wandered upstairs. He'd even tipped a couple of business reporters that there was a juicy governance story at Vale Corp, so the humiliation would leave the building. He thought he was ending me in front of 2,000 people. I found out because Kane's shadow wanted me to find out. Dorian let the plan slip near me, betting I'd panic and do something rash before the summit. Instead, I brought it to Celine. And Celine smiled, the specific smile. She smiled right before someone's whole life got repossessed. And she said, "Oh, let him give the presentation. In fact, let's make sure it's very, very well attended." So we did some homework of our own. Because here's the thing about a man like Hugo Barr, a man who needs an audience for his cruelty. He's been cruel a lot, and cruelty leaves records if you know which drawers to open. And I had spent 3 years cleaning those exact drawers. I knew things. I knew which junior analysts had cried in which stairwells. I knew the assistant Hugo got fired for insubordination. She'd refused to falsify an expense report he'd padded. I knew about the intern he'd made take the fall for a deal he tanked, a kid whose career ended before it started so Hugo's bonus wouldn't. Little Desmonds all over the building. People no one looked at, and now one of them was a special advisor with a black keycard and the ear of the CEO. The all hands filled up. 2,000 people, a stage, a big screen. The reporters Hugo had tipped sitting in the third row licking their pens. Hugo took the stage grinning like a man about to be paid in someone else's dignity. He clicked to his slide. My personnel file bloomed on the screen, janitor in 40-point font, and a satisfied murmur ran through the crowd, and Hugo turned to bask. Then Celine walked out onto the stage. The murmur died. Celine did not use the look. She promised me she wouldn't, and she didn't, and that mattered, because everything that happened next, the whole crowd chose to feel. She took the clicker gently out of Hugo's hand. "Wonderful," she said warmly. "Transparency. I love it. Since we're sharing personnel files, Hugo, let's share a few more." Click. Up came the falsified expense report. Hugo's padding highlighted in red, and beside it the resignation letter of the assistant he'd fired for refusing to sign off on it. Click. The tanked deal, the internal emails where Hugo arranged for the intern to take the blame, the intern's name, the date his contract was quietly not renewed. Click. 3 more. 4. A junior analyst's harassment complaint that had been lost. A vendor kickback. A performance review Hugo had rewritten to sink a rival. Reporters in the third row stopped licking their pens and started writing very fast. Hugo's face went through the whole sequence. The flat gray screen losing signal. Then a horrible mottled color like a fruit deciding to rot on fast forward. Then nothing. Just a man buffering in front of 2,000 people who were, one by one, remembering every time he'd made them small. "You wanted to talk about who we let into this building?" Celine said, and her voice carried without a single string behind it. And that was the beautiful part, that not one soul in that room was compelled to agree. They just did, all on their own, all at once. The way a room turns when it finally gets permission to hate the right person. "Let's, Hugo Barr, your access is revoked, your position is terminated, and legal will be in touch about the difference between the expenses you filed and the ones you incurred. Security will help you find the door." A pause and then, almost kind, "Watch the bucket. You've got a history with aiming." The room lost it. 2,000 people roaring and not one of them under a spell. Just glad, finally, honestly glad. Watch a man who'd needed an audience for his cruelty get exactly the audience he deserved for his fall. The reporters ran the story that night. Not the one Hugo ordered. A better one. By morning, Vale Corp director exposed was everywhere. His name a punchline, his network of little cruelties laid out for the whole city to read. Hugo Barr walked out of Vale Tower with a cardboard box. Past the lobby he used to strut through, and he did not kick anything, because there was nothing left in him to kick with. I watched him go from the 72nd floor. 3 years I'd said thank you to that man's shoes. I didn't gloat. I'd earned the right to, and I found I didn't want it. I just watched him get small and thought about the assistant, the intern, the analyst in the stairwell, the Desmonds, and I hoped, wherever they were, somebody told them. Then I went and found Mia and made sure she'd seen, because she'd have loved it, and she had, and she made me describe his face 3 times. Gray, I said, like a screen with no signal. Poetic, said Mia. You've been up here too long. Come do the 9th floor bathrooms. Keep you humble. I almost said yes. That evening, Celine finally told me what the summit actually was. I'd been picturing another shareholder dinner. Rich people, small food. It was not that. It was the Meridian Forum, once a year, on neutral ground. The people who actually run the world gather in one gilded hall to carve up the next 12 months. Heads of state, central bankers, the handful of private titans whose companies are bigger than most countries. Officially, it's about trade and climate and markets. Unofficially, it's the one night a year that almost every string worth holding is gathered under a single roof. Which is why Kane loves it, Celine said. She'd pulled up the guest list on the big glass wall of her office. 400 names glowing in the dark. Every year the council attends. Every year they do a little maintenance. A nudge here, a look there, keeping the world's most powerful people pointed in the direction the iris prefer. It's routine. It's how the leash gets tightened. One gentle turn a year, and no one ever feels it. And this year? This year isn't maintenance? She turned to face me, and the city lights behind her turned her into a silhouette. This year, Kane means to do all of it at once. Permanently. He spent decades on this room, softening it, seeding it, planting minor iris in every delegation. Tomorrow night, in front of the whole forum, he's going to do the single largest look in the history of our kind. 400 of the most powerful people on Earth, held at the same moment by the oldest will alive. Her voice was very steady, which was how I knew how scared she was. Not a nudge, a rewrite. He walks out of that hall, owning the actual controls of the actual world. The treaties, the armies, the money, with 400 puppets who'll spend the rest of their lives certain. Every order came from their own hearts. I looked at the 400 glowing names. And you? I'm second tier. Powerful enough to matter, not powerful enough to stop him. And worse, a mind he can't hold. A thin smile. You don't leave a locked door standing in the middle of a house you've just seized. The moment the room is his, Kane erases me. Quietly. An accident, a scandal, a heart that simply stops. He's done it to council members who stepped out of line. I've watched it. She folded her arms. So yes, tomorrow is the night he takes the world and removes me from it, in that order, in one room. He's been building toward it for a decade, and he just found out. I said slowly, that the one man on Earth who can switch off a room full of looks is standing next to the very target he needs to be in that room to erase. He found out, Celine agreed, and instead of calling it off, he moved it up a week. Do you understand what that tells us? I did. The cold click, the clean one. He doesn't think I'm a threat. He thinks I'm a bonus. Kill the last strong null and take the world on the same night, in the same room, with witnesses who'll never remember. I almost laughed. He's not walking into my trap. He thinks he's inviting me into his. Both of you are right about that part, Celine said quietly. That's what makes tomorrow the most dangerous thing either of us has ever done. Only one of us has read the room correctly, Eli. And we won't know which until it's far too late to change our minds. She looked at me. Last chance to be on that upstate bus. You already asked me that on the roof. I'm asking again. It's my new favorite thing, asking, the ghost smile. I intend to overuse it. The answer's the same, I said. I'm going to the forum, and I'm going to make 400 of the most powerful people on Earth wake up at once and remember exactly who's been holding their strings. I looked at the wall of glowing names. Let's go turn the lights on. The night before the summit, Celine came to find me. I was on the roof. She had a roof, of course, she had a roof, with a garden nobody ever sat in, looking out at the city that a 500-year-old man wanted to keep on strings forever. She came and stood next to me, not touching, close, and for a while we didn't say anything. Then she said, Eli, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear the word I'm using. Okay, tomorrow, if this goes the way I think Kane wants it to go, I will be standing in a room full of the most powerful people on Earth while the oldest monster alive tries to make them all his at once, and erase me for the crime of having a mind he can't hold. Her jaw was tight. You are the only thing in the world that can walk into that room and turn it off. You know that. You could also walk out of this tower tonight, get on a bus, and never see me again, and no one on Earth could stop you. Least of all me. I already tried, remember, the very first day. She turned to face me. The city lights caught the coin gray of her eyes, and for once there was nothing behind them but a person. I have spent my entire life making people do what I need. I have never once, not one single time, asked. She took a breath, and I watched it cost her. Watched 30 years of never having to say the word bunch up in her throat. So I'm asking, Celine said. Not ordering, not compelling. I couldn't if I wanted to, and I don't want to. Please stand in that room with me tomorrow. Not because you're a weapon, because I'm asking you to and you're free to say no, and that's the only kind of yes I've ever wanted in my whole life, and never once been allowed to have. The wind moved in the garden nobody sat in, and I understood, standing there, that this was the real reversal. Bigger than the tower, bigger than the power, bigger than any of it. Not that the janitor rose. But the woman who'd never had to ask for anything just asked a nobody for the one thing her whole terrible gift could never take, a choice freely given in her favor. Celine, I said, you could have ordered anyone alive to stand in that room. You'd have gotten a yes every time. I looked at her. You asked the one person who could say no. That's the difference between you and Cain, and I think it's the only difference that's ever mattered, and I think it's why you're going to win tomorrow, and he isn't. Her breath caught. That's a yes, by the way, I added. Obviously, it's a yes. I just wanted to say the speech first. You never let me finish the speech. And Celine Vale, richest, coldest, most feared person I have ever known, laughed the unguarded laugh again, the one that made her young. And this time she didn't hide it behind her hand and up on a roof over a sleeping city one night before the end of everything. The most powerful woman in the world held the hand of a janitor because she chose to, and he let her because he did. And not one string in the world had anything to do with it. Tell me the plan again, she said, later, quiet, her head almost on my shoulder. The summit, all of it. I want to hear you say it. So I told her. The room, the leaders, Cain holding all of them at once. Dorian in the crowd, Cain's ear waiting to carry our fear up the string. Me walking to the center, one hand on the spy's shoulder at the worst possible second. Every candle in the room snuffed at once. Every puppet awake. He's building the biggest look in 500 years, I said. A whole room of world leaders, held forever. He's built it right next to the one man on Earth who can turn a room like that off with his hands in his pockets. I felt the cold click again, the clean one. He thinks I'm the trap he's walking us into. He's got it exactly backwards. He built me a stage. Below us, the city glittered, obedient and asleep. Tomorrow it would wake up. I was going to make sure of it. The Meridian Forum was held in a hall built to make powerful people feel small. Gold everywhere. A ceiling so high the chandeliers looked like distant weather. 400 of the most consequential human beings on the planet, in one gilded room pretending the small food was the point. Presidents, central bankers, titans whose companies own the horizon. The hands that move oceans all in one place, all wearing name tags, which I found hilarious in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. I wore a suit that cost more than I used to make in a year. Celine had picked it. Stop fidgeting, she murmured as we came in. You look like you belong here. I look like a janitor in a good suit. That's what belonging here is, Eli. Everyone in this room is a janitor in a good suit. Some of them just forgot. Her hand found the small of my back. Brief, warm, real. And then she was gone into the crowd, all steel and coin gray, working the room, buying us minutes. Dorian was already there. Across the hall, gracious as ever, Cain's ear planted exactly where Cain wanted it, carrying our carefully rehearsed fear up the string all week. He didn't know we knew. He didn't know that the whole reason he was standing there was so that, at the right second, I could walk over and give a drowning man his life back at the worst possible moment for the thing holding his leash. And then I saw Cain. I'd built him up in my head into something monstrous, horns, height, a presence that bent light. He was a small man, 60 maybe if you didn't look at the eyes. Neat gray suit, neat gray hair, a face you'd forget on an elevator. He stood near the center of the room with a glass of water he never drank. And he was the most ordinary-looking person there, and that was the most terrifying thing about him. Because 500 years of running the world had taught Magnus Cain that the last thing you ever want to look like is powerful. His eyes found me across the room. Silver gray, like Celine's. But old the way a coastline is old, worn smooth by the sea of everything he'd done. He looked at me, and he smiled. And he lifted his glass a half-inch in a toast. The way you'd salute a worthy piece on a board you've already won. He wanted me to watch. That was the whole point of me being alive tonight. He was going to take the world in front of the one man who could have stopped it, and prove to himself, after 500 years of the fear, that a null was nothing, that my father had been nothing, that the fire could be lit right next to the water, and the water would just stand there. Behind him, spaced around the room, I found the others. Council. 6 more pairs of old silver eyes, positioned like the points of a wheel with Cain at the hub, a receptionist, a general in dress uniform, a woman in a red gown, an old priest. 2 more nobodies. 7 of the strongest wills alive, arranged to feed their strength up into one voice. Ladies and gentlemen, Cain said. He didn't raise his voice, he never needed to. But something in the word reached out and touched every mind in that room, and 400 of the most powerful people on earth turned toward him and went quiet, and smiled the pleasant, empty, standby smile I'd spent 3 years mopping around. It had begun. I want you to understand what it looked like, because I'll be seeing it the rest of my life. Cain raised one hand, palm up, unhurried, like a conductor lifting a baton, and the 6 around the room lit up. I could feel it, the strings thickening. 6 of the strongest looks alive, pouring their weight up into his. The wheel spinning to feed the hub, and that combined will came down on the room like a tide coming in, and 400 people who ran the world began, one by one, to bow, not all at once. That was the horror of it. It rolled across the hall like wind through a field. A president's shoulders dropped. A finance minister's chin sank to her chest. Row by row, the most powerful people alive lowered their heads to a small gray man they'd been introduced to as a private economic advisor, and their faces went soft and grateful and gone, and every string in that gilded room bent toward one hand. Celine fought it. I could see her fighting. She was Iris. A mind he couldn't hold. But she was one strong will against 7, and Cain wasn't trying to bow her. He was pressing her flat, the way you'd lean a door shut against someone on the other side, holding her still and helpless in the middle of it, so she'd have to watch her whole world fall and know she couldn't lift a finger. Her hands were shaking, her jaw was iron, and slowly, degree by degree, the most powerful woman I'd ever known was being forced down onto one knee in a room she'd sworn to save. Cain looked at me while he did it, the whole time. That ordinary little face, watching me watch, savoring it. "You feel it, don't you?" he said, and his voice arrived in my head private and close, the way he'd spoken through the drunk VP, except now it was aimed at me alone. "Nathan's boy, I can't touch your mind. I never could touch your kind, but I don't need to touch you." He tilted his head. "I only need you to stand there, exactly as helpless as you are, and watch me prove that the thing your father died to protect was never worth protecting. 400 of them, boy, the actual world, and the last strong null on Earth, close enough to smell it doing nothing. That is how the fear ends. Not by killing you, by making you irrelevant in the one room where it counts." He thought that was checkmate. He'd spent 500 years learning to read every player at every board. He'd never once played against a janitor. Because here's what Magnus Cain, in all his centuries, had never had to learn. When you spend your whole life being invisible, you get very, very good at walking across a room while everyone important is looking somewhere else. And every important person in that room, including Cain, who could not stop watching my face for the moment it broke, was looking at me. Which meant nobody, not one soul in 400, was looking at Dorian Crest. I didn't run. Running draws eyes. I walked the slow, unbothered, invisible walk of a man with a mop and somewhere boring to be. The walk I'd perfected over 3 years of being furniture. Straight across that gilded hall, through rows of bowing world leaders, right up to the gracious man standing at the edge of it all with Cain's leash sunk 9 years deep into the back of his skull. Cain's voice curled in my head, amused. "There's nowhere to go, boy. What are you?" I put my hand on Dorian Crest's shoulder like an old friend, and I opened him like a door. 9 years came off Dorian in a single heartbeat. And here's the thing, Cain didn't understand until it was far too late. Dorian wasn't just a spy. He was a node, a live wire running straight back to Cain, the ear Cain had kept in Celine's house, a permanent open line. That's the trouble with a leash. It's a rope, and a rope has 2 ends, and Cain had spent 9 years holding one of them without ever once considering what would happen if something reached him through the other. I woke Dorian, and the wave didn't stop at Dorian. It ran up the leash. For the first time in 500 years, something pushed back into Magnus Cain. Not a look. He was immune to those. Worse, the absence of one. A wave of pure waking, the unlook, the thing that snuffs strings, traveling up the private line he'd sunk into another man's mind, and slamming into the hub of the whole wheel at the exact instant he was holding 400 souls and pouring 7 wills into one. Cain staggered. The small gray man actually staggered, and his glass of water hit the floor and shattered, and for one exquisite second the tide going out across that room faltered. And in that second, I stopped being invisible. I turned to the center of the hall, to Cain, to the 6 points of his wheel, to 400 bowed and borrowed heads, and I stopped reaching gently the way I'd practiced on Priya and Cole in a quiet, locked room. I opened both hands, and I let go of everything at once. 10 seconds. Dorian timed it after. He said it was 10 seconds. It felt like 1, and it felt like the length of my whole life, both. I have thought a lot about how to describe what I did, and the closest I've got is this. Imagine a room full of 10,000 held breaths, and you are the exhale. The unlook went out of me in every direction, and it was not gentle because there was no time for gentle. Every string in that gilded hall, Cain's tide, the 6 council wills feeding it, the minor iris salted through every delegation, every leash on every borrowed leader, went slack in the same instant. 400 of the most powerful people on Earth surfaced all at once. together, gasping, out of a fog most of them hadn't even known they were in. Some of them out of years of it. You've never heard a sound like 400 people waking up at the same time. I have. I'll take it to my grave. It started as a single collective gasp, and it turned, within about 3 seconds, into something with an edge on it, because a person who has just realized they were being made to kneel does not feel grateful. They feel the exact opposite of grateful, and they feel it toward whoever they're kneeling to. 400 heads came up. 400 pairs of eyes, clear now, their own again, focused on the small gray man at the center of the room, with a shattered glass at his feet, and one hand still raised toward a spell that had just evaporated in his fingers. And the 6 points of the wheel, the council, the strongest wills alive, I hadn't spared them. Why would I? Their power ran on holding other people. The second I cut every string in the room, whatever they'd been using to hold their own faces together in public came off too. The general in dress uniform was clutching his chest. The woman in the red gown had gone the shade of old wax. The priest was on his knees and not to pray. Their whole lives, the unlook had been a fairy tale. The thing you drowned school teachers to prevent. Now it was in the room with them at full strength, and it had just turned off the family business. Cain looked at me across 10 feet of ruined ballroom. And Magnus Cain, 500 years old, the man who built the strings the world dances on, the closest thing this planet had to a god who billed by the hour, did the only thing he had left. He turned that ancient silver look on me directly, full force, everything, 5 centuries of will focused down to a spear and thrown straight into my eyes at point-blank range. I felt it land, and I felt it slide off me like rain off a windshield. The same as it had on a wet marble floor 3 weeks and a whole lifetime ago, when a man named Hugo Barr kicked a bucket at a billionaire's feet and told me to grovel. You dropped something, I told the oldest monster alive. I nodded at the shattered glass, at the raised, useless hand, at 400 awake and furious rulers of the actual world, all of them now looking at him. The whole thing, actually, I said. You dropped the whole thing, and there's not a towel on earth. It came apart faster than even Celine had dared hope, because that's the secret the Iris never wanted anyone to learn. A puppeteer with no strings is just a small man who's made a great many enemies. The room turned on him. Not by my hand, I never touched a single mind after the wake. Didn't have to, wouldn't have anyway. The flinch was still in me and I intend to keep it. I just gave 400 people back their own eyes, and their own eyes did the rest, because they remembered now. Every instinct that had made them sign the treaty, crash the market, start the war, look the other way. They remembered the small gray advisor who was always in the room when they did, and they did the math. 400 of the sharpest minds alive all at once. And they arrived at the same answer. Security, real security, awake security, their own moved in. The 6 points of the wheel didn't run. They couldn't. Half of them could barely stand. Their borrowed strength gone with everyone else's strings. The general wept openly. The woman in red kept trying the look on the guards holding her arms and finding it dead in her hands. Again and again. The way Celine had jiggled a broken key in me on the first day, and I almost felt something for her until I remembered the school teacher in the chair and didn't. And Magnus Cain stood alone in the center of it, in a spreading circle of empty floor, because no one would stand near him now. And I watched 500 years catch up with a man all at once. His face didn't go gray like Hugo's. It did something I've only seen once and hope never to see again. It aged. Right there. Every year he'd stolen from the world with that inward-turned look came due at the same moment, and the small, ordinary man became an old thing, thin as paper, shaking, staring at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. You don't understand what you've done, he whispered. Not a threat, a man watching his whole world go over a cliff. The strings held things together. Without us, the wars we prevented, the panics we soothed, He looked up at me. And there it was, the thing the profile of every monster leaves out. He believed it. He genuinely believed he'd been holding the sky up, and I'd just let it fall. You've unleashed chaos. 400 willful, frightened, powerful people with no one steering. Do you have any idea what they'll do? Yeah, I said. Whatever they choose to. I looked at him. That's the part you never could stand, isn't it? Not the chaos. The choosing. You spent 500 years terrified of a world full of people making their own bad decisions. So you made all the decisions for them, and called the quiet you got in return peace. I shook my head. It wasn't peace, Cain. It was a very big, very well-run room full of nobody home. My dad knew the difference. That's the whole reason you were scared of him. He'd rather have the chaos. So would I. Cain opened his mouth. For the first time in 5 centuries, Magnus Cain had nothing to say, because the one argument that had always worked, to look behind the words that made you agree before you'd finished hearing them, was gone, and without it, his words were just words. and his words weren't very good. They led him out in handcuffs he could not blink away. Past 400 people who would spend the rest of their lives not quite able to explain why they trusted their own minds a little less now, and a little more. He stopped once at the door. An old man now, held up by 2 guards whose minds he couldn't touch. He didn't look at the room he'd lost. He looked at me, the janitor, the whelp, the fire he'd lit the water next to on purpose to prove the water was nothing. "Your father," he said, and his voice had lost the thing that used to arrive in the back of your skull. It was just an old man's voice now, thin and cracked. I looked him in the eye at the end. 15 years ago, I told him his kind would never matter, that we'd hunt the last of you into the ground, and the world would go on dancing and never know it had ever had a choice. His mouth worked. He smiled at me. I never understood why. He was tied to a chair and he'd lost, and he smiled at me like he'd already won, and it kept me up for 15 years, that smile. I could not for the life of me work out what a dying man had to smile about. He looked at me, and for 1 second, 500 years of certainty cracked all the way through, and what was underneath was just fear. The specific fear he'd spent 5 centuries drowning schoolteachers to avoid arrived at last, permanent now. His. He had a son, Kane whispered. That's what he was smiling about. He'd already put the fire somewhere I'd never think to look. Somewhere small. Somewhere with a mop. His face folded. I spent 500 years watching the powerful. I never once watched the man cleaning the room. Neither did any of us. And that is how it ends. Not with an army, with the one person nobody in the room bothered to see. A terrible whispered laugh. Nathan, you clever, patient ghost. You knew all along. Then they took him out into the loud, awake, unruled night he'd spent 5 centuries trying to prevent. And Magnus Kane, who had been so many names in so many lifetimes, walked out of history as exactly what he'd always feared most. A small man in a room full of people who could finally see him. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder from 15 years and 1 bad carburetor ago. I hoped, wherever he was, somebody had told him. I thought maybe he already knew. He usually did. Here's the moment nobody tells you about. The one that came after the part with the handcuffs, and it's the one I actually hold my breath remembering. When the strings came off, 400 of the most powerful people on Earth woke up in a gilded room, terrified, unmoored, and looking the way frightened people always look, for someone to tell them what had just happened and what to do next. And the only person still standing calm in the center of that room, the only one who clearly understood, the one they'd all watched fight a force they couldn't name and stay on her feet, was Celine Vale. I watched it land on them. I watched 400 faces turn toward her, one after another. The way they'd turned toward Kane 10 minutes before, except this time there was no look pulling them. They were choosing it, freely. Frightened, grateful, leaderless, the actual controls of the actual world sitting loose on the table, and every set of eyes in the room asking Celine Vale, silently, please, tell us what to do. She could have taken it. I want to be clear about that, because it's the whole thing. There was a 5-second window in that ballroom where Celine Vale could have simply stepped into the space Kane had cut for himself. Not with a look. She didn't even need the look, just with the steadiness in her voice and the fear in the room, and become the new hand on all the strings. A kinder hand. A better one, even. She'd spent 30 years being told she was born to hold exactly this. And here it was, offered, no compulsion required, by the freely turned faces of the whole world. I saw her feel it. I saw the pull of it move across her face. 30 years of training, her father's voice, the country house, never forget the sound. The most dangerous second of the entire night, and Kane was already in handcuffs when it happened. And Celine Vale looked across that room, past 400 waiting faces, and found mine. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I just looked back at her, a janitor in a good suit, the one person in the room she couldn't move and had never wanted to. And she made her choice. She stepped forward, and instead of taking the room, she gave it back. You're awake, she told them, her voice carrying clean and unassisted through that gilded hall. For the first time in a long time, some of you're entirely your own. It's frightening. Good. Hold on to the fright, it means it's yours. She looked around at presidents and titans and kings. No one in this room is going to tell you what to think ever again. Not him, not me. You're going to have to do the terrifying thing now, and decide for yourselves, and get it wrong, and answer for it. That's not the chaos he warned you about. A pause. That's just being awake. Welcome back. Then she turned her back on the most powerful room on Earth, on the throne of the whole world, offered and declined in the space of a breath. And she walked toward the janitor, and she left it all behind her without looking back once. That's when I knew. Not on the roof, not in the boardroom, right there. That a woman who could have owned the waking world chose instead to walk across it toward one person who'd never once bowed to her. That told me everything I'd been afraid to know for 3 weeks. You could have had it, I said, when she reached me. All of it. They'd have said yes. I know. She was a little breathless, like someone who'd set down something very heavy. That's exactly why I couldn't. The ghost smile, and behind it, for once, no ghost, just her. I spent my whole life being loved by people who had no choice. I'm not going to spend the rest of it ruling them the same way. I'd rather have one honest thing than 400 obedient ones. She looked at me. I learned that from a man who told me I dropped something. He charged $11 an hour, and he was the best investment I ever made. Dorian Crest got his 9 years back the hard way, all at once on the floor of a ballroom, which is a brutal way to receive them. But he got them. He stood there afterward, blinking in his own eyes, a man who'd been a coat for nearly a decade. And the first fully free decision he made was to walk over to the woman in the red gown as they led her out and ask her, very quietly, for the name of the null she'd had dealt with in the spring, because Dorian had carried that order up the string himself, unwillingly, and he was going to spend his freedom finding out whether there was anyone left to say sorry to. That's who Dorian Crest actually was. Under 9 years of Cain. Celine had been right about him from the start, even when she couldn't feel the truth for the string. Good man. Terrible luck. He runs the foundation now, the quiet one Celine set up. The one that finds people who wake up in rooms they didn't know were cells and helps them figure out how to live in the daylight. There are more of them than you'd think. There's a lot of cleaning up to do when a 500-year-old machine grinds to a stop. Turns out I know a thing or two about cleaning up. We found Cole's daughter, by the way. She was 9, like he'd said, and she'd been told her father was dead, and she wasn't. That's a different story and a happier one, and it's not mine to tell. But I was there when they put it right. And I stood in the back and did the invisible thing and let the floor wax get in my eyes again. Old habit. And I decided that if being a null ever felt clean, that afternoon was the closest it would come. Morgan and Mia watched the whole forum thing on the news, from behind Celine's very expensive wall. Safe. Morgan called me the next morning. So, he said, kept your head down, did you? Tried, I said. You keep saying that like I've got a choice. Stone. His voice went rough the way it did when he meant a thing. Your dad, he'd have. He stopped, cleared his throat. He'd have been proud is all. Now come get your sandwich. Mia says you still owe her the 9th floor and she's not letting it go, and honestly, kid, neither would I. Man should remember where his mop was. I go down there still. Black keycard, good suit, 72nd floor, and every week I take the elevator all the way to the bottom and eat a sandwich with an old watchman and a sharp kid who does doubles for her brother's medicine. Because up top, everyone smiles at me for real now, which is nice. And down there they give me grief about toilets, which is realer. I know which room I'd rather be in. Morgan taught me that. So did my father, come to think of it. Same lesson. 2 teachers 30 years apart. The world didn't end when the strings came off. I know Cain swore it would. It just got noisier and more honest and harder. The way a house gets when everyone finally wakes up and has to actually talk to each other. Markets wobbled. Some governments changed hands. A great many powerful people spent a great many uncomfortable months wondering exactly how many of their proudest decisions had ever really been theirs. And a few of them became better for the wondering, and a few got worse. And that, Celine would tell you, is exactly the point. That's what awake looks like. Nobody steering, everybody choosing, getting it wrong on their own terms. It's messier than Cain's quiet world. I'll take the mess. My whole career's been the mess. I'm good at it. As for me and Celine, I'll tell you how it ended, and then I'll stop. Because she taught me that too. Don't dwell on the win, just land it and walk. The forum emptied out. The handcuffs left. The 400 most powerful people on Earth wandered off into the loud, honest, terrifying night to go run the world with their own hands for the first time in longer than most of them knew. And in the middle of that enormous gilded hall, where 10 minutes before every head had been bowed on a string, and every hand had moved to a will that wasn't its own, there were 2 people left standing. Celine turned to me, and this woman, who 3 weeks ago could have made me kneel with a glance, who tonight had turned down the throne of the entire waking world, who had spent 30 years never once having to ask for anything, because she could always simply take it out of the back of your skull. This woman looked at me, and she was nervous, actually nervous, and she held out her hand. She didn't reach into the back of my head. She didn't look. She didn't pull. She just held her hand out into the empty air between us, palm up, an open question, the single most powerless thing a person can do. And she left it there, and she waited, because she'd finally learned that the only kind of yes worth having is the kind you have to risk a no to get. In a room where, for 500 years, every hand that ever reached for another was moved by a string, I took hers because I wanted to. She felt it. She felt the absence of any string, felt that I could pull away any second and there was nothing on earth she could do to stop me, and felt me not pull away. Oh, Celine Vale said softly, for the second time, and the last, the same way she'd said it on the roof. A woman, finding a window in a room she'd spent her whole life certain was a cell. And I held the hand of the most powerful person in the world in the middle of the room where the strings came off, because I chose to, and she let me because she'd finally learned how to let someone choose. Nothing moves a stone unless a stone decides to move. I decided.